The day my divorce became official, my ex-husband pressed a bank card into my palm like it was a bandage for a wound he refused to see. I was so furious, I promised myself I would never use it. 2 years later, I checked the balance and froze. The paperwork happened on a slate-colored morning in a county courthouse in Portland, Oregon. The walls were too white, the lights too bright, the air sharp with disinfectant and tired carpet. Everything smelled like a place designed to turn human lives into files, stamps, and silence. He sat beside me with the posture of someone waiting for an elevator, not the man who once warmed my hands in winter. There was a gap between our knees, small enough to look polite, wide enough to feel like an ocean. I stared at my own fingers. He stared at nothing. We did not speak. The clerk slid the decree across the counter and asked us to sign. My pen felt heavier than it should. My throat tightened. 7 years, collapsed into a thin page and a hard stamp. I signed my name like I was signing away an entire version of myself, and I hated how quickly it happened. Outside, the sky pressed down, low and colorless. I turned toward the streetcar stop, ready to disappear into the city. Then I heard his voice say my name with the same controlled calm he used in meetings. I stopped, but I did not turn at first. His footsteps came closer, and a hand appeared in my vision, palm up. A silver card lay there, clean and cold, as if it had never been touched by anything emotional. He said it was money to help me start over. The pin, he added, was my birthday. I finally looked at him. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion, his suit still perfect. He looked like a man who could survive any crisis, as long as it fit into a schedule. The card looked like pity. I felt heat rise in my face. I told him I did not need it. He insisted I would, because rent and groceries did not care about pride. His words sounded reasonable, but my chest heard something else. Without me, he implied, I would not stand a chance. I laughed, sharp and hollow. My name is Marissa. I was 29 that day, and I worked as a project coordinator at a small construction firm that never made headlines. I was not fragile. I was not foolish. I was simply a woman whose love had been worn down by silence. I ripped the card from his hand, not to accept it, but to end the moment. Then I walked away too fast, my heart beating like it was trying to escape my ribs. I did not look back. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break in public. I moved into a studio in the Selwood neighborhood. A narrow room with a kitchenette and a window that faced a brick wall. Fresh paint stung my nose, and the cheap furniture smelled like glue. Compared to our Riverview condo, it felt like a punishment I chose. That first night, I stood in the middle of the empty space and held the card so tightly the corners bit my skin. Severance pay, I thought. A price tag on my devotion. Rage surged up until it blurred my vision. I opened the dresser and shoved it into the bottom drawer. I slammed the drawer shut and swore I would never touch a single cent from him. I told myself I would prove something, even if no one was watching. I would build a life so steady that his money would look ridiculous, like a joke told too late. The early weeks were brutal in small ways. There was no key in the lock at midnight, no footsteps, no familiar sigh of another person in the dark. The quiet was not peaceful yet. It was a vacuum. I lay awake listening to my own heartbeat and pretending it did not scare me. So I stayed busy on purpose. I worked late, volunteered for extra tasks, took online courses, and learned to fix things I used to ignore. I unclogged a sink with trembling hands. I carried bottled water up 3 flights of stairs. My shoulders ached. I did not cry. When exhaustion hit, my mind drifted to the drawer, to the card waiting like a dare. Every time, I pushed harder. I told myself stubbornness was strength. I told myself I had earned the right to stand alone. I turned my pride into a routine. On weekends, instead of hiding, I joined a yoga class in a warm studio that smelled like eucalyptus. I rode my bike along the river trail, watching couples share snacks and laugh. Sometimes sadness jabbed me in the ribs. I would turn my head and pedal faster. Months passed. The wound did not vanish, but it scabbed over. I stopped checking my phone at night. I stopped flinching when someone said my name in a tone that sounded like his. I learned how to be alone without making it a performance for an invisible audience. I tracked every expense in a notebook with neat columns. It was not about greed. It was about control. In a city where rent could swallow you whole, being broke meant you could not afford weakness. I refused to be the kind of woman the world could pity. My best friend Talia tried to soften me. She offered to set me up with her coworker, a sweet guy who baked banana bread. I told her men were distractions. She rolled her eyes and called me stubborn. I pretended I was amused. I was terrified of needing anyone. Near the end of that first year, my boss promoted me to assistant project manager. My salary jumped enough that I could breathe without counting every grocery item twice. When I saw the new number on my pay stub, I sat in my car and smiled until my cheeks hurt. I bought a gray sofa, a lamp with a warm glow, and 3 small plants that I kept alive out of spite and determination. I adopted a rescue cat and named her Juniper because she was small, sharp, and stubborn like me. Coming home to her made the studio feel human. I avoided news about my ex. I did not ask mutual friends. I did not stalk his profile. I told myself we were 2 lines that crossed and would never touch again. The card stayed buried. Dust gathered on my vow, and I let it, because forgetting felt like winning. The second year moved faster. I managed my own small team. Pressure became normal. Some nights I came home and fell asleep in my work clothes. On rare, quiet evenings, I held Juniper and watched old movies, sipping cheap wine and pretending I was completely healed. Then, on a rainy afternoon during a meeting, my phone buzzed again and again. It was my father. He never called during work unless something was wrong. I stepped into the hallway, answered, and heard his voice shaking like paper in wind. He told me my mother collapsed at home and was unconscious in the emergency room at St. Rowan Medical Center. The hallway blurred. Sound turned distant. My lungs forgot how to work. I muttered. I was coming and sprinted outside into rain that slapped my face like cold hands. I stood on the curb, trying to flag a rideshare, but everything moved too slowly. My blouse soaked through. My hair stuck to my cheeks. I did not care how I looked. I only knew my mother might be dying, and I was not there yet. In the car, my hands shook so hard I could barely hold my phone. I called my father back and demanded details like that could change outcomes. He said doctors suspected a brain bleed. He said they were running scans. He said she was still unconscious. The hospital was chaos. Fluorescent lights, wet floors, squeaking shoes, and the smell of antiseptic so sharp it made my throat burn. I found my father hunched in a plastic chair, his face gray with fear. He squeezed my hand like it was the last solid thing left. A doctor emerged with a clipboard and a professional calm that made me furious. He said my mother had a serious cerebral hemorrhage. He said surgery had to happen soon to remove the blood and reduce pressure. He said delays could be fatal. I asked the chances. He said about 70%. Then he gave the number that cracked my spine. The cost, he warned, would be around $80,000 for surgery, intensive care, and recovery. He said we needed to decide quickly. Then he walked away. $80,000 sounded like a foreign language. I opened my banking app with numb fingers. After 2 years of grinding, I had saved about $25,000. My father admitted he had $6,000 in a home account. Together we had $31,000, less than half. I started calling everyone I could think of. Friends, co-workers, distant relatives. Some offered help, some apologized. Talia wired $2,000 without hesitation. Another friend offered $500 and sounded embarrassed. Every call scraped my pride raw, but I kept dialing anyway. After hours, I gathered about $12,000 more. That brought us to $43,000. We still needed almost $40,000, and time was bleeding away with my mother's blood inside her skull. A nurse asked if we were ready to authorize surgery. My father looked hollow. He suggested we promise to pay later. I knew hospitals did not run on promises. I sank into a chair and stared at the doors. I hated myself for believing independence was the only safety. If my mother died because I could not pay, I would never forgive myself. That is when the image hit me. The bottom drawer, the card, the vow I made in anger. I felt my stomach twist. No, I told myself. Never. Using it would mean admitting he was right, that I needed him, that my pride was a costume I wore until life ripped it off. Then I looked at my father, his hands clasped like prayer, his eyes fixed on the door as if staring could bargain with fate. Beyond that door was my mother. Pride did not matter. My vow did not matter. Only her heartbeat mattered. I told my father I was going home briefly, and that I might have a way. He tried to ask questions, but his voice failed. He only gripped my arm and told me to be careful. I walked out of the hospital into night air that tasted like wet concrete. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Streetlights reflected in puddles like trembling coins. In the car back to my studio, I clenched my fists until my nails cut my skin. I felt like I was walking toward a cliff I swore I would never approach. My apartment greeted me with quiet and the soft thud of Juniper jumping from the sofa. She meowed, offended by my panic. I did not stop to pet her. I went straight to the dresser and knelt. My hand hovered over the drawer handle like it was hot metal. I stood there too long, hearing my own voice from 2 years ago, promising never to touch his money. The vow echoed with cruel clarity. I laughed once, bitter and hollow, because fate did not care what I promised. Then I yanked the drawer open. The card lay in the corner, coated in a thin layer of dust, waiting like it had been patient all along. I picked it up. Cold spread from my fingertips to my chest. I sank onto the bed and covered my face with both hands as tears soaked my palms. I told myself I was not losing. I was borrowing. I would pay it back, double if I had to. I would never let it become a chain around my neck. But right now, it was a lifeline. I wiped my face, changed clothes, and slid the card into my wallet. The nearest bank was a bright glass vestibule on the corner. It was late, and the lobby lights made everything look too clean. I stood in line behind a woman withdrawing cash slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. When it was my turn, my hand shook. I inserted the card. The screen asked for the PIN. My birthday. The same date he used to remember even when he forgot dinners. I hesitated, then typed the numbers. Each beep sounded like a judgment. The machine accepted the PIN. My mouth went dry. I selected balance inquiry. The screen loaded for a few seconds that felt like hours. Then the number appeared. My vision blurred. I blinked hard and leaned closer, reading each digit slowly. It was not a few thousand. It was not even 50,000. It was enormous. I stepped back like the screen might bite me. This made no sense. Even a successful man did not hand over that much money and call it a settlement. I ejected the card, checked the bank name, checked the last digits. It was the same card, the same account. I did not withdraw anything yet. Unease crawled up my spine. I needed clarity. I walked into the main branch lobby, took a paper number, and waited with my wallet clenched in my fist. The amount replayed in my head like a siren. When the teller called me, I handed over my identification and the card. I asked for the current balance and a full transaction history for the past 2 years. The teller raised her brows, then nodded and began typing. The keyboard clicks sounded like a countdown. A printer started whirring behind her, spitting out pages, one after another, stacking into a thick pile. My stomach tightened as the pile grew. She organized the pages and slid them through the slot. She read the balance aloud. It matched the machine. My ears rang. I sat in a waiting chair with the statements trembling in my hands. The first line showed a deposit 2 days after the divorce, $200,000. Memo blank. That could be a settlement, I thought, though it still felt huge. Then I saw the next pattern. On the 15th of the next month, deposit $3,000, memo living expenses. I flipped the page. Again, on the 15th, $3,000, living expenses. Another page. Same. My throat tightened. It kept going, month after month, relentless as clockwork. Then came smaller deposits, with short notes. A winter month. Memo for a warmer coat. It is getting cold. My birthday. Memo, happy birthday. December. Memo, Christmas money. Each simple phrase hit like a soft fist, gentle and brutal at the same time. For 2 years, while I congratulated myself for surviving without him, he was quietly sending money as if breathing. No calls, no demands, no guilt, just a safety net he left in the dark, assuming I might someday need it. Tears dropped onto the pages and smeared ink. I wiped my face and forced myself to stand. My mother was waiting. I went back to the teller and requested a withdrawal and a wire transfer to the hospital billing account. The teller looked startled, but she processed the paperwork. I signed with a hand that trembled. The cash felt heavy in my bag, like every bill carried a sentence I never said. I left the bank and hurried outside, breathing hard. City lights glittered on wet pavement. I called a car and gave the hospital address. Then I stared at my phone like it was dangerous. His name was still in my contacts. Not because I wanted him there, but because deleting it felt too final, like burning a bridge during a flood. My finger hovered over the screen. We had not spoken in 2 years. I did not know how to begin without choking. I pressed call. The rings stretched. I feared he would not answer. that he changed numbers, that he moved on. On the fourth ring, his voice came through, low and tired. "Hello." Hearing that single word shattered the shell I built. My throat tightened instantly. I told him it was me. Silence followed, thick and startled. Then he said my name softly, like he was afraid it was a mirage. I said I went to the bank. I saw the transaction history. I asked why he did it. I asked why he never told me. He inhaled slowly. He said he was sorry. He said he did not know how to tell me without making me reject it. He admitted he was afraid I would refuse help and get hurt. He said he wanted me to have something to fall back on if life ever collapsed. I sobbed, humiliating and unstoppable. I told him I misunderstood for 2 years. I told him I thought he paid me off. He said it was his fault, that he always tried to solve problems with money because it was the language he knew, and he learned too late it was not love. Then I told him about my mother, the hemorrhage, the surgery, the bill. I said I used the money. He did not hesitate. He asked where I was. I said I was on the way back to the hospital. He told me to send my location. He said he was coming. I said he did not have to. He cut me off. He told me not to shut him out. Not now. He said he just wanted to help. I sent the location with shaking hands. The call ended. I leaned my head against the window and watched the city smear into light. At the hospital, I ran to billing and paid. The clerk confirmed the payment and nodded. They would move my mother to surgery immediately. My knees almost gave out. My father looked at me with raw relief, but he did not demand explanations. He only held my hand. When my mother was wheeled away, I stared at the swinging doors like they were the gate to everything I feared. I sat down and clasped my hands together until they hurt. I prayed, even though I did not know who I was praying to. I just begged for time. 30 minutes later, I saw him at the end of the hallway. He wore a dress shirt with his tie loosened, like he ran out of a meeting without thinking. His eyes found me and softened, and he walked faster. He asked how she was, voice low. I said she was in surgery. He sat beside me. The warmth of his body radiated close enough that I noticed. No one spoke for a while. The silence felt different from the courthouse silence. That one was a weapon. This one was a shelter. Imperfect, but real. My father returned from the vending area and saw him. He stared for a moment, then thanked him, voice thick. My ex bowed his head with quiet respect and said it was what he should do. Watching them, I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot slowly untying. Hours crawled. The fluorescent lights hummed. The floor smelled of bleach and tired footsteps. My eyes burned. I was afraid to blink too long. He asked if I ate. I shook my head. He brought coffee anyway, the kind from a machine, bitter and lukewarm, but steadying. At some point, he offered his shoulder. I hesitated, then rested my head against him. His scent was familiar, but not comforting in the old way. It was comforting in the way a door is comforting during a storm. I let myself be weak for a few minutes. When the surgeon finally emerged, he pulled off his mask and announced the operation succeeded. For now, he said, the next 48 hours would be critical. Relief hit so hard my legs buckled. My ex caught my arm and kept me from collapsing, steady and silent. I cried then. Not pretty tears, not controlled tears, just the kind that empties a person out. My father cried too. We thanked the doctor until our voices cracked. Then we saw my mother through a window, pale but breathing. Her chest rose and fell, and I felt my soul return. As dawn crept into the hallway, my ex handled paperwork, talked with nurses, and moved like someone trained to stay calm. I watched him and felt a strange mix of gratitude and grief. This was the man I wanted during my marriage. It took losing me for him to show up. When visiting hours allowed a brief look, I held my mother's hand and whispered, I was there. Her eyelashes fluttered. My father sobbed. My ex stood outside the glass door like he did not want to intrude, but his eyes never left me, attentive and careful. Later, when my father stepped out to rest, I told my ex I would pay him back. He said we could call it a loan. He said he would not rush me. That word loan mattered. It kept my dignity intact. I nodded, and he nodded back. Agreement without pressure. Over the next days, he came quietly. He brought food I barely touched. He asked before visiting. He left when I said I was tired. He did not make speeches. He did not demand forgiveness. He simply stayed present in the way he never had before. I noticed the smallest changes. He asked what my mother needed instead of assuming. He listened when I spoke. He did not fill silences with excuses. He waited. Waiting used to be my job. Now he did it, like he finally understood what waiting costs a person. When my mother became more lucid, she looked at him and thanked him. He answered politely and bowed his head. She looked at me afterward with quiet knowing. Her eyes said what her weak voice could not. Do not confuse pride with protection. Sometimes they are enemies. Then a new fear arrived, wearing a familiar face. A woman from his professional world showed up at my office and tried to warn me he would not change. Her words stirred old ghosts. I confronted him. He admitted he was still busy, but he promised clarity, not vanishing. That promise was tested when an emergency trip pulled him away for 2 weeks. The first night he texted instead of calling, and my stomach tightened anyway. When he said he would call back in an hour, my chest flooded with old panic. But he called exactly on time. I told him what waiting did to me. I told him it reopened wounds. He listened. He said he would message beforehand if delays happened so I would not guess. The guessing was what destroyed me before. This time, he removed the guessing like it was a thorn. When he returned, I did not run into his arms, and he did not expect me to. He sat on my sofa while Juniper watched him with judgmental eyes. He said he was tired but grateful. He thanked me for not running away. I told him I was learning, too. My mother moved from intensive care to a regular room, then to rehabilitation. I drove her to therapy. I watched her fight for each step. I learned that strength is not loud. It is repetitive. It is showing up again and again when life is heavy and no one claps. One evening, standing on my balcony, my ex asked if we were heading in the right direction. I told him yes, because I did not feel like I was enduring. I felt like I was choosing. Choice was new to me. Before, I tried to earn love by tolerating everything. I agreed to dinner. Not a date, just dinner. We went to a small family-run place that smelled like garlic and comfort. He offered rules instead of promises. No silence. Clear money boundaries. Respect space. I added my rule. If I started losing myself, I would stop. He accepted without arguing. That mattered more than flowers. It told me he finally understood that love cannot be held by force or guilt. It can only be held by mutual honesty. We walked afterward under streetlights, and the air felt lighter than it had in years. Months passed in a calm rhythm. He visited without intruding. I worked without shrinking. My mother healed slowly. Juniper tolerated him and eventually allowed a cautious head bump. Small victories. Real ones. No fairy tale, no dramatic speeches, just steady repair. 1 year after my mother's collapse, we stood in the same hospital hallway for a follow-up appointment. The smell of disinfectant still made my throat tighten, but it also reminded me of survival. We walked out into sun, and I realized something painful and true. The card was never an insult, not really. It was a flawed man, trying to stay near without forcing contact. He did not know how to love me properly then. I did not know how to ask for what I needed. We both hid behind silence, and silence did what silence always does. I used to think asking for help meant defeat. Now I know defeat is refusing the truth. Defeat is letting pride gamble with a life you love. Defeat is swallowing fear until it turns into resentment. I learned that courage is not only leaving, sometimes it is letting someone return. I do not pretend our story is perfect. We still hit waves, deadlines, fatigue, old triggers that rise like ghosts at night. But now we name them. We talk. We do not disappear. We do not make money stand in for care. We do not confuse distance with indifference. If you have ever stood between pride and love, you know how brutal that crossroads feels. I stood there in a bank lobby with trembling hands and a stack of statements that rewrote my history. I stood there in a hospital hallway watching doors close and praying they reopened. What saved my mother was money, yes, but what changed me was the truth behind it. Love does not always arrive wrapped in poetry. Sometimes it arrives as persistence, as a monthly deposit, as a coat note in winter, as showing up at 3 a.m. without asking. Love does not die because people get busy. Love dies because people stop speaking. Love dies when pride turns into a wall and no one climbs it. If my life has taught me anything, it is this. Silence is not peace. Silence is just the moment before something breaks. My name is Marissa, and I learned to survive alone. Then I learned something harder. I learned how to let someone stand beside me without losing myself. That is not weakness. That is a different kind of strength, the kind that chooses honesty over performance, and healing over winning.